All right, so far we have covered the vision, which is chronological, the interpretation, which is not chronological, as we saw, and now we are going to identify by name the powers that are symbolized in the vision and explain it all in plain language. Okay? This is, and we're going to go through the entire vision. Okay? 2nd Esdras chapter 11, verse 1. Then saw I a dream, and behold, there came up from the sea an eagle, which had 12 feathered wings and 3 heads. Who is this eagle? What power is this eagle? If you recall, it says in chapter 11, verse 39, when the lion speaks to the eagle, it says, Art not thou it that remains of the 4 beasts whom I made to reign in my world? Art not thou it that remains of the 4 beasts? Notice it doesn't say that it was one of the 4 beasts, but it remained of the 4 beasts. Okay? And it also says in verse 11 of chapter 12, in the interpretation, it says, the eagle whom thou sawest come up from the sea is the kingdom which was seen in the vision of thy brother Daniel. Daniel, 4 beasts made to reign in God's world, right? So what were those beasts? Well, if you go back to Daniel chapter 7, you had a lion, a bear, a leopard, and then a dreadful and terrible beasts. They represented Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome. Very easy to show that, okay? And that Roman beast had 10 horns on its head, and then another little horn which plucked up 3 horns by the roots, okay? Now it says, Art not thou it that remains of the 4 beasts whom I made to reign in my world? It wasn't necessarily one of the 4 beasts, but it remained of the 4 beasts. And what remained of the 4 beasts? What power does Paul teach will be in place even until the second coming? It remains that long. It is the papacy. Okay? You had the Babylon, Medo, Persia, Greece, Rome. You had the 10 divisions of Rome. And then the papacy came into power, and it did all this evil stuff. And you can see this in Daniel chapter 7. You can see this in Daniel chapter 8. It does all this evil and wickedness and blasphemy, especially blasphemy against God and persecuting the saints and so forth. And they did this for a period of 1260 years and whatnot. Okay? So that's who the eagle represents. It is the Holy Roman Empire, because the papacy was a church that controlled the state of Rome. Okay? All right. Art not thou it that remains of the 4 beasts whom I made to rule in my world? The eagle whom thou sawest come up from the sea is the kingdom which was seen in the vision of thy brother Daniel. Very clearly, it's referring to the Holy Roman Empire. It's referring to the papacy, the church controlling the state, the Roman state. Okay. Now, let's keep going. Came up from the sea an eagle which have 12 feathered wings and 3 heads. We're going to get into those in a little bit. And I saw, and behold, she spread her wings over the earth, and all the winds of the air blew on her and were gathered together. Now, if you remember from Daniel and Revelation class, when winds are blowing on stuff, in fact, you can see this in Daniel chapter 7, winds blowing up on the sea, and out of this turbulent sea arose nations, okay? Out of this war, this strife and commotions, which is what winds represent, it's troublous times. Out of these troublous times, there arose nations in Daniel chapter 7. And here you see that this eagle spreads her wings over all the earth, all the winds of the air blowing on her. You know, somebody didn't like the establishment of the papacy. They didn't like the idea of this church and the idea of her controlling the state. They opposed her. These were of the 10 divisions of Rome. These were the Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. And if you remember, the papacy, or the little horn, plucked up those 3 by the roots. The papacy was enabled to destroy those 3 divisions of Rome. Okay? And all the winds of the air blew on her and were gathered together. Verse 3, and I beheld, and out of her feathers there grew other contrary feathers, and they became little feathers and small. This is kind of like saying it's got 8 more feathers. It has 3 heads. We'll get to all that, but it's just adding more details about the eagle. It says in verse 5, verse 4, but her heads were at rest, and the head that was in the midst that was greater, yet rested it with the residue. Verse 5, moreover I beheld, and lo, the eagle flew with her feathers, and reigned upon the earth, and over all them that dwelt therein. And I saw that all things under heaven were subject unto her, and no man spake against her, no, not one creature on the earth. You notice that's not how it started? The way it started is, what did she do in verse 2? She spread her wings over all the earth, and all the winds of the air blew on her. People did not like the establishment of the papacy. They didn't like seeing the rise of the papacy. They did not want her to come to a power. They opposed her, and they were exterminated. And once they were exterminated, in 538, the papacy began its 1260-year reign of supremacy. Okay, so she spreads her wings over all the earth. She's opposed, but then she gets rid of the opposition in 538. The eagle flies on the earth with her feathers, reigns on the earth and over all those that dwell therein with not with much oppression. Yeah, sorry. And I saw that all things under heaven were subject unto her, no man spake against her, no, not one creature on the earth. That is the 1260 years of papal supremacy. It ended in 1798 when the French took the Pope captive. Okay? All right. Now, the French took the Pope captive. Was the papacy destroyed in 1798? No, but it stood in peril of falling, didn't it? It received a deadly wound. This is why I said you need to be familiar with Revelation chapter 13. Okay? In 1798, that's when remember it said in the interpretation, it says, and as for the voice which thou heardest speak, that thou sawest not go out from the heads, but from the midst of the body thereof, this is the interpretation, that after the time of that kingdom, after the 1260 years of papal supremacy, there would arise great strivings, and it would stand in peril of falling. The papacy would stand in peril of falling, nevertheless it would not then fall, but would be restored again to its beginning. The papacy was not annihilated in 1798. The Pope was taken captive. But in 1929, the papacy got back that which it lost. What did it lose in 1798? It lost control of the state. The papacy still existed, but it no longer controlled the state. Okay? And that was the deadly wound that was inflicted. And then in 1929, it was restored. In February 1929, it was restored. February 11th, I think it was. The papacy got back control of the state. Not over all the kingdoms of Rome, but it became its own nation. So it has power, it has civil power within its own within the borders of its kingdom. Okay, right? Because it became its own nation. That's what it lost. It lost control of the state. It was wounded, but the wound was healed. It got back control of the state in 1929. She's not restored to her former glory. Okay, she was never restored to her former glory, but she did get back that which she lost. The deadly wound was healed. Okay, she would stand in peril of falling. Nevertheless, it would not then fall, but it would be restored again to its beginning. So after the 1260-year rule of papal supremacy, when all things under heaven were subject to her, and no man spake against her, no, not one creature upon the earth, then the eagle rises up on its feathers and rises up on her talons and speaks to her feathers, which means that after the time of that kingdom, after the 1260-year rule of papal supremacy, it would stand in peril of falling, but it wouldn't fall. It would be restored again to its beginning. Something about it would be damaged enough, even though it wouldn't fall. Even though it wouldn't fall, something about it would be damaged enough that it would need to be restored again to its beginning. This took place in 1929. Okay? Now, we've gone from before 538 to 538, all the way to 1798, and then it talks about the restoration, right? He would stand in peril of falling, but shall be restored. That's actually part of the interpretation. He shall be restored, okay, again to his beginning. We're in 1929 now. What happens next? Verse 11, and I numbered her contrary feathers, and behold, there were 8 of them. And I looked, and behold, on the right side there arose 1 feather, and reigned over all the earth. So in 1929, we need to start looking for the ruling of the first feather. Okay? The ruling of the first feather in 1929. Now, who was the world leader in 1929? Who was the dominant nation in 1929? That was between the world wars, World War I and World War II. You know how that's how kingdoms rise in the Bible. There's winds blowing upon the sea, which waters represent nations, multitudes, peoples, and tongues. I think it's Revelation 17:15 that says that. But the winds blow on the water, and then out of the sea arise great nations, right? Powerful world empires. I forget why I mentioned this. The middle between World War I and World War II. We're in 1929. So there's turbulence. I mean, if this was going to be symbolized, it would make sense. Hey, there'd be wind blowing upon the sea, and a great nation is getting ready to arise. Okay? Since 1929, what nation became the world dominating superpower? The United States. For many years, the president of the United States has been regarded as the most powerful man in the world. Okay? So even though it wasn't clear in 1929 who ruled over the earth, so to speak, or who was the top dog, the leading superpower, even though that wasn't clear because there were still world wars going on, we saw who arose. It's kind of like if you go to a chess tournament. There's only one top dog there. Okay? You don't know who it is until the smoke blows away, until the tournament's finished, okay? And so, but if we were going to base it off of that premise, which is very solid because we can see here in the interpretation, it says what? Behold, the days will come, this is chapter 12, verse 13. Behold, the days that will come that there shall rise up a kingdom upon earth, that it shall be feared, and it shall be feared above all kingdoms that were before it. It's going to be feared more than all kingdoms that were before it. It says, in the same shall 12 kings reign, one after another. In the same, in a kingdom that's feared above all nations that were before it, in the same shall 12 kings reign, one after the other. Now, it may have been debatable in 1929 whether Herbert Hoover was the world-leading superpower, but the 12 kings reign in the same kingdom. In the same kingdom, right? And this kingdom was a kingdom that was going to be feared above all kingdoms that were before it. So by the time you get to Feather 12, it's very clear who the world superpower is. Okay? So, 1929 is when we've got to start looking for the first feather to rule in the dominant world superpower. Okay? The top dog. But that was in the middle between the world wars. It wasn't yet established, but there really was somebody that was going to come out. We saw who came out, and so we know that that's the superpower. And in that nation, we need to look for the first feather. And guess what? Okay? Remember how the eagle speaking to her feathers represented the fall in 1798 and the restoration? And then when was the restoration? February 11 of 1929, and after February 11, 1929, we were supposed to look for the ruling of the first feather. And you'd be like, James, now wait a second. The president is inaugurated in January. Herbert Hoover was actually the last president to begin and end his reign in March. Okay? And in March, let's see, which specific day was it? March, it was in March. I think it might have been March 4. I can't remember exactly. But in February 11 of 1929, the deadly wound was healed. And in the next month of March, Herbert Hoover began his office. So immediately after the deadly wound was healed, we're supposed to start looking for the first feather ruling over all the earth. And immediately after, Herbert Hoover, in the world-dominating superpower, as we see once the smoke blows away, begins to rule. Okay? And he ruled over all the earth. Okay? You can easily argue that. Now, from there, what happens next? The second feather was what? The second feather ruled longer than all the rest. Now, this is important that you pay attention to this. Somebody had a problem with this second feather ruling so long. Who ruled after Herbert Hoover? Who ruled after Herbert Hoover ended his office? It was Franklin Roosevelt. And Franklin Roosevelt was in office for 12 years. He ruled longer than any president since him. He has ruled longer than any president since him. Now, the vision says, it's talking about the second feather. It says, and it happened that when he reigned, the end of it came also. This is verse 14 of chapter 11. And it happened that when it reigned, the end of it came also, like as the first, so that it appeared no more. Then came a voice unto it, and said, Hear thou that hast borne rule over the earth so long, I say unto thee, before thou beginnest to appear no more, there shall none after thee attain unto thy time, neither to the half thereof. In the vision, somebody had a problem with this feather ruling so long and said, nobody's going to last as long as you, and nobody's going to even last half as long as you. But do you remember that the interpretation doesn't say that? The interpretation doesn't say that. It says in verse 15 of chapter 12, whereof the second shall begin to reign and shall have more time than any of the 12. It doesn't say no one will reign as long as half as long as him. It doesn't say that. Okay, somebody had a problem with Franklin Roosevelt ruling for 12 years and made efforts to stop it. Did you know that it was because of Franklin Roosevelt that the 22nd Amendment was set in place, limiting the amount of time that a president can hold office, then limiting the number of terms to 2, so you can only read for 8 years. Now, it's important to point out the vision is not amenable to the personal problems that the powers that be in the vision have. Okay, so let me give you for an example. In Revelation chapter 12, we have a woman standing on the moon. She's about to give birth. This is the church. Jesus is about to be born. And the dragon, which represents Lucifer, stood before the woman to devour her child as soon as it was born. And this we see is, Lucifer by means of the Roman Empire trying to destroy Jesus when he was a kid, when he was a baby. Okay. Now, the dragon wanted to destroy the man-child as soon as it was born. Did that happen? No. Does that mean the vision failed? No, it doesn't mean the vision failed. It means Lucifer, and that's his personal problem. You lost, buddy. You didn't accomplish what you wanted, okay? So when it says here in the vision, hey, somebody's got a problem with this, a voice comes to this feather and says, Hear thou that hast borne rule over the earth so long, I say unto thee, before thou beginnest to appear no more, there shall none after thee attain to thy time, neither to the half thereof. If that doesn't happen, that's their problem, okay? There was a voice that spoke in this vision. The first voice that was speaking in this vision was that of the papacy. She spoke to her feathers. Watch not all at once, but watch by course, right? Let the heads be preserved for the last. And then you have a voice only a couple verses later saying, hey, I got a problem with that. We're going to limit your number of terms. Okay, so the papacy has a problem with this guy, with Franklin Roosevelt ruling for 12 years. And then he said, nobody's going to reign half as long as you. Well, if it doesn't happen, buddy, that's your problem. Because the prophecy is not amenable to your personal problems. It's only amenable to itself. And the interpretation said, whereof the second shall begin to reign and shall have more time than any of the 12. And that Franklin Roosevelt has done. So Franklin Roosevelt meets the specifications of the prophecy. The prophecy does not, it's not the prophecy's problem that that people after him reigned longer than half. That's not the prophecy's problem. That's the papacy's problem. Okay, that's the other power's problem that worked to put in place this 22nd Amendment. Okay, that's their problem. So, okay. Now, let's keep going. Now, at this point, let me make sure I covered the stuff I needed to cover. Restoration, 1929, Eagle of Papacy. Okay, yeah. Okay. So at this point, you would be like, well, wait a sec. If all these things are so, all we need to do is what? If we could just count down the remaining feathers, well, 1929, 20 feathers, like, we're probably close, right? Well, let's go ahead and do it. Okay, I've got the list of presidents here since Herbert Hoover, who was the first feather ruled over all the earth, Franklin Roosevelt, who ruled the longest, After that, you have Harry S. Truman, which is 3, then Dwight Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, George Bush, Bill Clinton. That's the 12, okay? That's the first 12 feathers. Bill Clinton was the last of the 12 feathers. Then you have, of the 8 contrary feathers, that were little feathers and small, the little under feathers, George Bush and Barack Obama. Now, if you remember, in the vision, it said 12 feathers appeared no more, nor the 2 little feathers. That's chapter 11, verse 22. So the 12 appeared no more, nor the 2 little feathers. The 2 little feathers it's talking about are George Bush and Barack Obama, because those are the next 2 that came after the 12. Feathers 15 and 16, right? What happened with them? That was the 2 that divided themselves from the 6. They're going to reign after the lion speaks to the eagle, okay? And then there was 4 left. There was 4 left. One reigned a short time. That's Donald Trump. He reigned 4 years. The next feather was supposed to reign a shorter time. Let's go ahead and read that here. It says, verse 25, chapter 11, I beheld, and lo, the feathers that were under the wing thought to set up themselves and to have the rule. And I beheld, and lo, one was set up, but shortly it appeared no more. And the second was sooner away than the first. So shortly appeared no more. That's Donald Trump. The second was sooner away than the first. That's Joe Biden. That's Joe Biden. Joe Biden's not going to last in office as long as Trump. And what happens? What happens next? Let's keep looking. Okay? Let's keep looking here. It says, okay, in verse 28 of chapter 11, and I beheld, and lo, the 2 that remained. Joe Biden was the 18th feather. There's 2 that remain. What happens to them? Do you remember what happens to the last 2? Let's see. And I beheld, and lo, the 2 that remained thought also in themselves to reign. And when they so thought, behold, there awaked one of the heads that were at rest, namely it that was in the midst, for that was greater than the other 2 heads. And I saw that the other 2 heads were joined with it. And behold, the head was turned with them that were with it, and did eat up the 2 feathers under the wing that would have reigned. Now, notice something here that's interesting. You need to pay attention here. It says, and I beheld, and lo, the 2 that remained thought also in themselves to reign. And when they so thought, behold, there awakened up this head and gobbled them up. And when they so thought, when do United States rulers or potential rulers or leaders or presidents, when do they think to reign? Because it says, and when they so thought, this middle head awaked. When do they do that? Election year, right? And that's when they do it? See, when I had first studied this prophecy 11 years ago, 12 years ago, whatever it was, 10 to 12, I was like, well, whoever this president is, because I didn't know him by name at the time. I was only under Obama at the time. That's where I was in the vision. I was like, well, he just won't last as long as, whoever would be Trump. I mean, it was Trump, but I didn't know him by name. He won't last as long. But I didn't realize that it says, and when they so thought. That means it would be during election year, right? That when they so think, that's when the middle head awakes and gobbles them up. It's election year. Now do you see why I've been feeling sick as a dog? Now do you see why I've had like panic attacks, my heart gets racy and I'm out of breath? Now do you see why, I didn't say this, but basically I've been pleading with God to forgive our sins and to save me and change my character and make me holy, and just because it's overwhelming. Like, the middle head awakes and eats them up. Now the middle head also appears no more, but after it finishes the wickedness of the eagle, which is the papacy. Do you remember that from the interpretation? Let's read that again. Chapter 12, verse 23, it says, in his last day shall the Most High raise up 3 kingdoms and renew many things therein, and they shall have the dominion of the earth, and of those that dwell therein with much oppression above all those that were before them. Therefore they are called the heads of the eagle. Heads of the eagle. Heads are kingdoms. The eagle's the papacy. Therefore they are called the kingdoms of the papacy. These, they do what? They accomplish his wickedness. They accomplish let's go ahead and read that again. And of those that, verse 23, in this last day shall the Most High raise up 3 kingdoms and renew many things therein, and they shall have the dominion of the earth, and of those that dwell therein with much oppression, above all those that were before them. Therefore they are called the heads of the eagle, or kingdoms of the papacy. For these heads, are they that shall accomplish his wickedness, that is the papacy's wickedness, and finish his last end. Finish, that's a very last, and last is a very last, and end is a very last. It says they shall finish his last end. What is the final wickedness of the papacy if it's not enforcing the mark of the beast? Okay? These 3 heads have to do that. But this middle head does what? This middle head appears no more. Before it appears no more, it has to have done what? Finished the wickedness of the papacy. That means that any time now, the middle head is going to wake up and it's going to rule in place. Oh, by the way, middle head represents the United States, because it's a kingdom, right? And it's going to rule in the place of the next feather, if you haven't followed that. And one of the other reasons that I'm going to say that the middle head is the United States is because in Revelation 13, which nation is it that enforces the mark of the beast on the entire world? Which nation was it? The United States, right? Beast comes up from after 1798, because it's also mentioned in Revelation 13. The deadly wound was healed. I think it's verse 2 of Revelation 13. Okay, the deadly wound was healed. And then what? John saw another beast coming up from the sea, from the earth. Okay, that's one of the reasons we know it's the United States. He came up from the earth instead of from the sea, and then did what? He had horns like a lamb. What is a lamb? Lamb represents Christ. So if it has horns like a lamb, that would mean it would be like a Christian nation, or at least Christian in profession, because he spake as a dragon. So this is the United States is going to be the main power in enforcing the mark of the beast, as you can clearly see from Revelation 13. And here you have, this is the middle head. This is the greatest head, the greatest kingdom of the papacy, right? And it's going to be finishing the wickedness of the papacy, which would be enforcing the mark of the beast, which is what America does in Revelation 13. Okay, so the middle head is the United States of America, and also it represents that king or that ruler at that time. So our nation, our electoral system, and then the American government as we know it is going to go through a rapid shift, a change in government. And what does Revelation 13 teach? It teaches that our nation, the beast with lamb-like horns, which is our nation, it's going to make an image to the beast, which had a wound by a sword and did live. And what was the beast that had a wound by the sword and did live? That beast was the papacy, and it was wounded. It was what? It was a church that controlled the state of Rome. That's what the deadly wound beast. It was the papacy. It was a church that controlled the state. Our nation is going to make an image to the beast, or a likeness. It's an idol, ultimately, like a graven image. That's what John saw in vision. This lamb-like beast makes an image that is a likeness of the beast. That means our nation, the government of our nation is going to start enforcing the demands of the churches. We're going to make an image to the beast and cause all that would not worship the beast to be killed. That's what our nation's getting ready to do. Massive change in government's about to take place. Massive change in government. Okay, when? Well, I mean, right now, any time now. Our nation, our government is about to be overtaken. And the churches are going to be the one that are controlling it to make an image to the beast and to enforce this mark. And by the way, that means we'll be required to break God's law, because those who receive the mark of the beast receive terrible punishment. You read the whole Bible, nobody receives terrible punishment unless they've done evil. Okay? So when our nation requires you to violate God's law, or when any nation requires you to violate God's law, don't pay attention to them, because what they're saying is wickedness, and if it's the very time of the end, they will be requiring you to receive the mark of the beast. And that's basically just a mark that God puts on those who, rejected him. And that's how it was long ago. Criminals would have a mark placed on them signifying their crime and that they were worthy of death. Okay, so that's what the mark of the beast is. It's a mark that's placed upon the disobedient. Okay, so don't disobey. All right. So, I'm going to go ahead and close this because I think I only have about 30 minutes and then this thing shuts off on me. But we're going to pick this back up here in just a moment. So don't forget where we left off.